We are living in the best of times. I'm sure you would be interested to know why I say so. Hearty welcome, Swagatham, Vanakkam to one and all. You have heard people say, and their numbers are increasing, that we are living in the worst of times. Everything is at sixes and sevens. There is no stability in the society or the national scene that we cherish. All the traditional support systems of life that we have banged on have tumbled or seem to have tumbled like a house of cards, particularly to religion, from which generations before us have drawn their assurances, especially about what happens after death, and even derived guidelines as to how to lead a meaningful, disciplined, and dignified life. That seems to have completely collapsed. Even if there are many who do not realize that fact simply because they are kept too completely confined within the enclaves of parochialism and denominationalism to realize what has happened and what is still happening. As regards politics, both globally and nationally, I don't have to say much about it. It's there for all to see. Where once we thought there was some room for idealism and principles in politics, and it's not far back in time that we used to talk about principled politics. Crass expediency, naked and aggressive pursuit of selfishness, the most unconscionable violation of all norms of public conduct, and massive monumental degrees of corruption, venality, and human depravity are all in evidence. And yet, the more corruption and inhumanity gain ascendancy in the domain of politics, the more fervent and hopeful people somehow tend to be or pretend to be, which is something that foxes me completely. As regards the other sources of our enlightenment, the media, for example, the less said about it, the better. What about the intelligentsia of India, intelligentsia all over the world? By the way, the word intelligentsia is a word of Russian origin. And in the Russian context, the word intelligentsia did not mean one who is particularly sharp in intelligence. The foremost characteristic, the hallmark of the Russian intelligentsia, when there was an intelligentsia in Russia, was their moral passion. Moral passion. Of course, the moral passion must be combined with the ability to understand the realities of the given situation in order to be the voice of sanity and reason in the particular context. What has happened to the Indian intelligentsia? Your guess is as good as mine. What has happened to education? So on and so forth. Now, in the midst of all this, here is an old man sitting and telling you that this is the best of times to live in. And I wouldn't be surprised if you think that I have gone bonkers. I'm off my nuts. Well, let me share my reason with you and then you judge for yourself. In my experience, as well as in what little sense of history I have, it's when all the traditional stays of life, support systems of life collapse, that human beings feel urged, desperately driven, if you like, to look for fresh insights, fresh possibilities, unprecedented ways, or to use a cliche, that's the context in which people, more and more people, would dare to think out of the box, in a non-stereotypical fashion. During normal times, when everything is working smoothly, life becomes more and more automated. The human thinking process dims, and life is lived between sleep and wakefulness. Because we have our support systems working. And surely, the more efficient the support systems are, the less efficient the individual needs to be. That's simple common sense. For example, if I have a particularly efficient walking stick, then it doesn't matter if I don't take care of my body balance. The walking stick will take care of it. If I have a very efficient computer with plenty of memory, then I don't have to improve my memory, the computer will take care of it, and so on and so forth. So the more we depend on systems of support, the more incapable, dependent, and underdeveloped we become. And this is what the great French philosopher Jacques Ellul, Ellul, Jacques, Jacques, Jacques Ellul, called the grand betrayal of the West. He was commenting on the deleterious impact of technology on life and culture in the Western context. Now, this is obviously before the 90s, when globalization became the order of the day. After the 90s, the difference between the East and the West is gradually diminishing. So what Jacques Ellul said about the grand betrayal of life by the dominance or the ascendancy of technology in the Western context applies with equal force and verity to the Indian context as well. So, we are living in what T.S. Eliot in the 30s of the last century called the wasteland of human life. The wasteland. His most famous poem is titled The Wasteland. Now, there are two ways in which you can respond to this reality, this human predicament. By the way, one of the very illuminating books you can read if you want to understand the human predicament in modern times is a book by Hannah Arendt, Arendt. The title of the book is The Human Condition. She doesn't use the word predicament. Why she doesn't use the word predicament and prefers to use the word condition, she explains in that book. And if I reveal everything, you will not read the book, and therefore I'm not going to go further into it. The Human Condition by Hannah Arendt. So there are two completely different ways of responding to this human condition, this wasteland of modern predicament or modern condition. One is to say that everything is meaningless and life is stupid, life is absurd, and therefore the only thing we can do, or the two possibilities in this context, either lead a life of instinct, impulse, without any discipline, a life of debauchery, soulless, mindless enjoyment, pleasure seeking, etc. The other is to come to the conclusion that life is not worth living, and therefore the sooner you end it, the better. That's the conclusion to which some of the existentialist philosophers after the time of Søren Kierkegaard. And the idea of suicide, for example, recurs, appears again and again in the works of Dostoevsky, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who again is a very leading figure in the existentialist philosophy and literature. So, within existential philosophy, there is a particular school of metaphysical revolt. Metaphysical revolt, that is, revolt against the metaphysics of life, because thinkers of the school found it very difficult to believe that there was something beyond the present visible order that apparently lent some order, dignity, and meaning to life to the generations preceding them. So now that all that is gone, life has been reduced to an absurd drift of meaningless events, which become unendurable. And therefore, they came to the conclusion that the sooner you put an end to it, the better. So this is the idea of suicide, which plays an important role in the thinking of the existentialist philosophers. But a writer like Albert Camus, in his very famous work called The Rebel, also argues that in order to bear witness to the fact that life has indeed become absurd and meaningless, one still has to live, if only to tell the truth that life has become meaningless, and therefore one must not take one's life, or one must not commit suicide. However, it is not the details or the minutiae of the existential school that's my main song in the present video. What I'm saying is, there was one response. The other response is, and that's what I advocate, yes, life has come to this sorry pass. All our great excitements, all our great hopes, aspirations that we so fondly entertained for such a long time have been belied. Science, religion, politics, culture, they have filled our horizon with the sort of expectations and aspirations that today have withered away. So what? Such a context is ideal to make a new beginning. It's only when the baggage of the old is discarded that the freedom to seek and find that which is new, that which is unprecedented, becomes real. And I dare say, that from Jesus' perspective, he was living at such a time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said, seek and find. Christians even today refuse to understand the profound historical resonance of that statement. Such a thought that people have upon themselves, every individual has on himself or herself the burden of responsibility to seek and find what is beautiful and meaningful and truthful about life, cannot arise in a context of stability. Jesus lived at a time that's comparable to our own, perhaps a little more aggravated by the fact that he belonged to a subject nation. Palestine was under Roman domination, so politically the Jews were not free, and there was tremendous religious disarray, something that's common to that period and our own. So if you really look for the analogies between the age in which Jesus lived and perfected his work and our own age, you find a lot of similarities. So what makes a difference is the difference of personality. It's possible to look at the same situation and come to completely different conclusions. Let me give an illustration. There is a story of two salesmen, one from the United States and the other from UK, both representing two shoe manufacturing companies. Both of them landed in Congo, Africa. Congo at that time was reputed as the land of darkness. And they were sent there by their companies to explore markets for exporting their shoes. Obviously, the people in Congo hadn't begun wearing shoes, and therefore there would be great markets. So the story goes that both salesmen reached Congo around the same time. The British salesman went to a post office. In those days, there was no phone, there was only telegraph. So he sent a telegram home to his employer, to his company, saying, natives barefooted, no market for shoes, returning home. The American salesman went to the same post office and sent a telegram. Said, natives are barefooted, markets unlimited, rush supplies. Context is the same. The whole scenario is identical. The perceptions differ. So I differ from the existentialist philosophers, the doomsday prophets, the naysayers. I consider living at the present time as something of a great privilege. Great privilege. This is the time for individuals who want to make sense of life, to really explore the greatness and the beauty of life and the truth of life, the meaning and purpose of life. From our birth onwards, we and several generations preceding us have been spoon-fed. We have been injected with a lot of things about which we really don't have the foggiest idea. And the people who stuffed us with all these things, they themselves didn't have any idea as to what they were doing. When it comes to religion, when it comes to any organized activity that is handed down from one generation to another, it doesn't take long for something to become mechanical. And whatever is mechanical is also meaningless. When you get into a car and drive, you never ask the question, what is the meaning of an automobile? We never ask the question, what is the meaning of locomotion? What is the meaning of combustion? We never ask such questions because no mechanical activity leaves any room for reflection or presents the need for any thinking. It just goes on and on and on habitually. Even the way you drive is unthinking. About 99% of it is done in a kind of motor action kind of way. When you were learning driving, all your conscious attention was focused on the various aspects of driving as well as reading the world around you. But once you get used to driving, then it becomes at least 95% automatic. So you become mechanical in your driving, and any mechanical activity or all mechanical activities exclude the need to think as well as the room to think. So it's when, for example, that the car you drive breaks down that you suddenly begin to think, what's wrong with my car? Let me get out of the car and find out. You begin to seek and find. Maybe you developed a flat tire. And how did you find out? You sought, you got out of the car. Suppose you don't get out of the car, you sit in the driver's seat and you refuse to move. Then you will never find out what the reason for your halt is. So, I dare say that is a great blessing that all religions today are in extreme states of disarray, unbearable degrees of degeneration, and religions, organized religions, are becoming the dens, as Jesus said, of thieves. 2000 years ago, that was the same thing. He said, you have turned worship places into dens of thieves. It is not at all a problem. It's a great blessing because there was nothing much to be gained from any one of them. Rather, they were a great hindrance, they were a liability because the fact that you had these props prevented you from seeking and finding something for yourself. Unfortunately, vast majority of Christians, I know Christians fairly well, and therefore I'm going to confine myself to the Christian community. Those belonging to other religious communities can apply this to their situations on their own. A vast majority of Christians are under the terribly deluded impression that the best that they can do for themselves is somehow to defend the rottenness of their denomination or their churches. Unfortunately, there are a few of that kind in this group as well. Now, that which is rotten must be discarded. When I say that which is rotten, I mean that which is beyond reform. Now, for example, suppose you have a fruit. You try to preserve it as best you can. Maybe you'll keep it in the best refrigerator, etc., etc. But don't try chemical treatment as people do these days. But what happens after the fruit becomes completely rotten? Just throw it away. It was once a very nourishing thing, very delicious, very enjoyable. But after it is rotten, it serves no useful purpose. Rather, it will only spoil, pollute the domestic atmosphere. The best you can do is to throw it away and look for a new fruit. A fruit may be a poor analogy to denote religion. Religion is far, far greater than all the fruits in the world. But even so, I would tell you that it's a good thing that religion has become as rotten as it has. Because there is a need for a new spiritual revelation. Now, the tragedy of human religiosity, as we have seen in the last several centuries, it didn't start yesterday or day before. For centuries, this process has gone on, this process of degeneration, is that God has been reduced to a religion. Human beings need God, not religion. And the greatest deception that religion has practiced on human beings is to make people believe in the grandest of all lies, that religion is equal to God and God is equal to religion. And it's because of this that millions and billions of people have believed that God is comfortable, alive and active only within the boundaries of their religion. Their gods are so small that they are irrelevant to life beyond the small little compound, enclave that they create for their gods. Such a God is an insult to humanity. It can do no good to you. And the religiosity that has been developed over the centuries with all kinds of twists and turns, modifications, etc., fine-tuning, has all been based on this most deadly, terrible misrepresentation, misunderstanding of God, the parochial God, the sectarian God, the denominational God, the small God of your making. And that's why human history is also the history of religious wars, where these small gods and those who are blind enough to follow them fight with each other. In the words of the British poet Matthew Arnold, here we are as on a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. Whenever I think of religious wars, I think of these words by Matthew Arnold. Darkling plain means a valley or a plain where darkness is setting in. You can't see anything clearly. And what's happening there? A great battle is raging. Who are the fighters? Soldiers. But these soldiers cannot see what they're fighting against. They don't know what they're fighting against. They are blind. Or at least they can't see anything clearly. Where ignorant armies clash by night. That night is in their soul. So these are agents of darkness fighting with each other. What's happening in Gaza? Do you think it's a clash of lights? What's happening in any context? What's happening between, say, Orthodox and Jacobite churches? Clash of lights or darkness? Think of any context. It's always ignorant armies clashing by night. So in such a context, when fortunately all the old rotten baggage of false religiosity have disintegrated, turned into ashes, as indeed they must, because that's the logic of history, logic of life, logic of nature, it's the logic of God. Because these cobwebs of falsehood must break, that a new light be born. That was exactly what Jesus was doing 2000 years ago. The grand cobweb called Judaism, presided over by a tyrannical priestly class, reducing the religious life of the people to unbearable burden, bearing false witness to God, degrading places of worship into dens of thieves. That became the ideal setting for Jesus of Nazareth to evolve and to present to the world an alternate vision. So the disintegration and death of the old is a precondition for the birth of the new. In a few weeks' time, we'll be celebrating Christmas. The real meaning of Christmas is the death of the old and the birth of the new. But Christians will never accept it. They rather hold on to the old. And they think that the best thing they can do is to shut the door bang against the birth of the new. And they'll celebrate the birth of Jesus, who is the birth of the ever-renewing possibilities of life. So as for me, I consider it a great blessing, an invaluable advantage, a matchless advantage to be living at the present time. Amidst all this intensifying darkness, I experienced the freedom that I had never experienced before, to think, to reflect, or to use that humane word used by Jesus, to seek and find. And what I'm sharing with all of you through these videos is a little small fragment, very small fragment of what I'm finding. I have to proceed very slowly because those who have been trained to live entirely on the old system, believing their very rottenness to be ordained by God and very sacred, they cannot stand too much of reality. One of my favorite novelists, Joseph Korzeniowski Conrad, in his classic novel Lord Jim, says, human beings are dreamers. They cannot dispense with their dreams because they are not strong enough to face the truth. This is the time, my dear friends, that we need to gain the strength to seek and find the truth. And seeking is possible only when the chains and the manacles of the old are broken. And as Jesus says, the captives must be led free. These are the captives of the old system who believe that only in the distant past things relevant to life could have been born, that the living God died a long time ago, and therefore nothing new, nothing relevant, nothing forward-looking can ever be derived from God. I don't believe in that mummified God. I don't believe in that dead God, a God only of the past, distant past, a God only of orthodoxy, a God only of mechanical behavior, a God only of unthinking, meaningless rites and rituals. I believe in the God of life. And life for me is ever new, ever new. It's like the gurgling of the fountain. Water is universal, but each time the fountain gurgles, it's fresh water that comes out, fresh water. And God to me is that never-ending gurgling of the fresh water of life in all its freshness, all its purity, and all its beauty. And the freedom to relate to that God is available to me today as never before, never before. Therefore, I fold my hands in gratitude to God for the freedom that I am now given to look beyond the old, the irrelevant, the anachronistic, the outdated, and the rotten, to seek and find and to celebrate something new, something fresh, something that can kindle new life. Thank you. All the very best.